As Mao Zedong's armies continued their rapid sweep across China, Chiang Kai-shek's regime collapses. One city, one army, one illusion at a time. With Shanghai, Beijing, and Nanjing all under threat, the economy in freefall, and the Americans turning away, Chiang plans to abandon the mainland. His last hope now lies across the sea, on a small island where he plans to make his final stand. I'm Indy Neidell. Welcome to episode 4 of the Chinese Civil War, part of our series War to War, where we follow the wars that wouldn't end within a Cold World War, the beginning of the digital age, the atomic age, and the space age, when we began to replicate our minds electronically, gained the power to end our very existence as a species, and discovered that we truly can reach for the stars. Okay, last time, the communists crushed the nationalists in both Manchuria and in East and Central China, eliminating about 1 million nationalist troops. Meanwhile, Chiang's attempt to curb hyperinflation only deepened public anger towards his regime. Now Mao's forces stand on the precipice of another major victory, Beijing. Before I start, though, I will have to roll the clock back just a few months, because there's a lot that happened I didn't have time to cover last time. Okay, it's late November 1948. Lin Biao's armies prepare to advance south from newly captured Manchuria, across the Great Wall, heading for Beijing. Mao could perhaps have skipped the city for now. I mean, it's largely isolated already, with nationalists holding only a thin railway corridor surrounded by communist territory. But there are two big reasons to strike. First, seizing Beijing and Tianjin will prevent the nationalists from reinforcing Jiangsu, where the PLA is currently engaged in the Huaihai campaign. The PLA, the People's Liberation Army, is the military arm of Mao's Chinese Communist Party, the CCP. Second, Beijing carries immense symbolic value. Once capital of the Ming and Qing dynasties, and the first capital of the Republic in 1911, it's steeped in political and historical prestige. So in November, the communists launched the Ping-Jin campaign. Ping for Peiping, the romanization of Beijing's official name at the time, and Jin from Tianjin. Lin Biao's Northeast Field Army and Nie Rongzhen's North China Field Army bring together 900,000 men, facing about 600,000 NRA troops under Fu Zuoyi. The NRA, or National Revolutionary Army, is the military arm of Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist government, the Kuomintang, or KMT. By late November, the PLA has both Beijing and Tianjin under siege. Before really attacking them, though, Lin and Nie strike first at Qinbaoan, capturing it on the 22nd of December, followed by Zhangjiakou 2 days later. Then they turn to Tianjin. Lin launches his assault on the 14th of January. Although the city's nationalist commander vows to fight to the end, it is only a matter of time until it falls. It was another bloody affair. The NRA troops under Chen Changji, the nationalist commander in the city, fought tenaciously and courageously through the day and into the night. But with no prospect of reinforcements coming to their assistance, there was little real chance they could hold on. On the dawn of the 15th of January, Chen Changji told his men to lay down their arms. He then formally surrendered. There was now nothing to prevent the PLA from taking Beijing. The only issue was whether the nationalists would go down fighting to defend it. Lin Biao's forces have already cut off Beijing's water and electricity and now occupy parts of the outer suburbs. Fu Zuoyi appears ready to resist. He orders trenches dug, barricades built, and he even constructs an improvised airstrip by tearing down trees, telegraph poles, and buildings. Outside the walls, homes are leveled to clear fields of fire. Inside the city, troops and police armed with submachine guns and swords patrol the streets. Fu is a capable general, but he knows how this will end. With just 200,000 men to defend Beijing, he fears the city will suffer the same fate as Changchun, where Lin Biao's forces starve defenders and civilians into surrender, and hundreds of thousands of people die. Already disillusioned with Chiang's rule, the looming destruction of China's cultural capital pushes him into a deep depression. At first, he asked Chiang for permission to resign, but when the Generalissimo refused, he resumed the secret negotiations he had opened with the People's Liberation Army through his daughter, who was a member of the Communist Party. After a 40-day siege, a surrender document was signed on the 22nd of January 1949. All of the 240,000 troops under Fu were absorbed into the Communist Army. The treatment that he and his troops received served as an inducement to other nationalist commanders and officers to defect. Beijing surrenders without a fight, and an eerie calm settles over the city. KMT troops still patrol the streets. The trams and trolleybuses keep running. Shops and cinemas stay open. People prepare for the Chinese New Year, January 29th. The only visible change is the removal of Chiang's portrait from Tiananmen Square. Then, on January 31st, the PLA enters Beijing to a jubilant welcome from crowds of communist supporters. Altogether, the nationalists have lost another 500,000 troops during the Pingjin campaign. If we take the three major campaigns of the winter of 1948 and 49 together, Pingjin, Huaihai, and Liaoshen, then the NRA has lost more than 1.5 million men as casualties or defectors. The Nationalist Army is no longer an effective fighting force on the mainland. The taking of Beijing by the PLA marked the climax of a remarkable period. In scarcely more than 4 months, the communists had won 3 overwhelming victories. They had driven the KMT from northern China and were now poised to extend their authority over the whole of the country. In a dramatic reaction, Chiang Kai-shek acknowledged his responsibility for the nationalist humiliation by resigning from the presidency. He handed over authority to Li Zonggren, his vice president. Chiang's resignation as president is little more than a hollow gesture, though. He stays on as leader of the Nationalist Party, and he continues to pull the strings with the military. But now, with so much action on the battlefield, it's worth taking a minute to check where we stand when it comes to U.S.-China relations. A small but vocal set of people in the United States have been anti-Chiang for almost a decade now. Back in World War II, I covered U.S. Army General Joseph Stilwell and his scathing views of Chiang. Likewise, the U.S. State Department has long been critical of Chiang's police state tactics, his economic mismanagement, and his exploitation of the peasantry. President Truman himself has described the KMT as grifters and crooks. After the end of the Second World War, public opinion also became more critical, largely for the same reasons. It didn't help Chiang's reputation that reporting from communist areas was scarce, so their abuses remained largely hidden. But many of Chiang's critics were effectively silenced when U.S. Ambassador to China Patrick Hurley resigned in late 1945 and lambasted the State Department as a bunch of communist sympathizers. The mainstream American political position remained largely supportive of Chiang as the Civil War resumed, although there were debates as to how far and to what end. In the end, the Truman administration went ahead with a program of what we might call limited assistance. In part, that was because Washington doubted the nationalists could defeat the communists militarily or politically. The preferred solution was a coalition government with Chiang as president and the CCP as a legal opposition party. To that end, the U.S. has never given Chiang anything close to what he has actually asked for. True, some of Chiang's demands have been pretty outlandish, like his request for 10,000 U.S. officers and for direct American military intervention against the PLA. But on the other hand, Chiang's defenders will point out the U.S. even imposed a 10-month arms embargo to try and bring him to the negotiating table. So, how much has the White House sent over? Well, by early 1949, Truman's administration has supplied some $2 billion in aid and $1 billion in military equipment to the nationalists since the end of World War II. But is $3 billion really that much? The U.S. has committed to supply $13 billion to Western Europe in the Marshall Plan. Still, however significant or insignificant the figure, the money seems to have been wasted. Truman calls Chiang a busted flush, someone or something once promising, but now worthless. Also, the U.S. doesn't really have a plan for what happens now. The policy of limited assistance assumed that for their part, the communists would never be able to defeat Chiang, that the war would end in a stalemate. This allowed the Truman administration to put China firmly on the back burner while their focus shifted to Stalin and Europe. This view prevailed up until late 1948, and there was little attempt to either restart negotiations between the two sides or put Chiang in a winning position. Now, US diplomats sound increasingly desperate as they face the reality. Chiang is going to lose. Okay, back to the battlefield. With North China secured, everyone is waiting to see if the communists will take the next step and advance to the Yangtze River. The Soviets still prefer a divided China, communist north, nationalist south, and Stalin advises Mao not to cross the river. For the Americans, this is now the best outcome they can hope for too. Chiang appeals to both superpowers for mediation and even asks Mao directly for a ceasefire, not a peace, just a pause in fighting. But he's probably still demanding too much, and nothing comes of it. In the end, it is Mao who briefly halts offensives and invites new President Li Zongren to Beijing for peace talks. But Mao now holds his whip hand, and his terms amount to near unconditional nationalist surrender and include prosecuting Chiang and others as war criminals. With negotiations collapsed, a military resolution seems inevitable. The U.S. urges the nationalists to use the Yangtze as a defensive line and consolidate in the south. Li thinks, he could manage this, but he's undermined by Chiang himself. The two have long been at odds. Li belongs to the Guangxi faction, which has never fully accepted Chiang's leadership. For more on those leaders in the KMT, check out our Between Two Wars videos on 1930s China. To this end, Chiang keeps issuing military orders, and the commanders tend to follow him and not Li. He now sees the mainland as totally lost, and he orders Nanjing and Shanghai to hold as long as possible, not to save them, but to buy time for his evacuation plan. Chiang's real goal is a withdrawal to Taiwan, Formosa. As Shanghai and Nanjing brace for the assault, the nationalists transfer as much gold, silver, foreign exchange reserves, and manpower to the island. By early 1949, some 300,000 of Chiang's forces are based there, soon to be joined by aerial and naval units. Chiang's hope? Well, to ride out any attempted communist assault across the Taiwan Strait, rebuild his power base, and wait for World War III. In his mind, the U.S. will eventually destroy the Soviets, depriving the CCP of its main backer, and he'll return to reclaim the mainland with American help. One group who have no say whatsoever in this are the Taiwanese. So far, nationalist rule has been anything but kind to them. Having been under Japanese colonial rule since 1895, the Taiwanese had regarded the nationalists' arrogant reclaiming of the island in 1945 as the replacement of one oppressive regime by another. They deeply resented being treated as if they had been collaborators. Under direct instruction from Chiang, the NRA forces violently ousted the local people from their houses, shops, and businesses and denied them any say in government. In frustration, the Taiwanese in February 1947 mounted a large-scale demonstration in Taipei, the island's capital, only for it to be crushed bloodily by the nationalist forces, who killed over 10,000 of the protesters. Back on the mainland, the communists used the lull from January to April 1949 to regroup. Soon, they will move out once more and will bring the civil war to an end. In Beijing, talks drag on. Li Zongren still can't get Mao to compromise. Eventually, the CCP issues an ultimatum. Li refuses. Days later, on April 20th, the PLA resumes its offensive and begins crossing the Yangtze River. Within days, 1 million PLA troops move into Jiangsu, Zhejiang, and Jiangxi, facing 700,000 nationalist troops with little will to resist. Chiang has no interest in a serious defense. He fears that if Li and the Guangxi clique succeed in holding the south, they'll form a rival power base that threatens his Taiwan plans and control of the party. Communist General Deng Xiaoping is in command of some 300,000 PLA troops, and he will later recall how easily they crossed the river. We did not encounter fierce resistance anywhere. We made a wide frontal crossing from scores of places, meeting with no substantial resistance in most places. Beginning on the night of April 20th, nearly all the 300,000 men crossed the river in a 24-hour period, plunging the enemy troops into chaos. With just one thought on their minds, breaking out of the encirclement, they fled southward helter-skelter. During the river crossing, Mao seizes an opportunity to send a message to the world at large that China will never again submit to the Western powers. That chance comes when he encounters the British Royal Navy sloop HMS Amethyst along the river from Shanghai to evacuate British civilians from Nanjing. Mao orders his gunners to open fire, crippling the ship. 2 white flags were hoisted, but the shelling continued for days on end, killing 44 sailors. The Royal Navy frigate remained trapped for 10 weeks before it managed to slip its chain and escape, as the communists demanded that Britain, the United States, and France withdraw their armed forces from all of China. Mao saw in the Amethyst the perfect symbol of old China and ordered his troops to brook no foreign interference. The attack on the Royal Navy made headlines around the world. Mao was delighted. A few days after the Amethyst incident, communist troops start their final advance on Nanjing. By then, nationalist troops are deserting in droves, and the city has descended into chaos. Soldiers and civilians loot homes and government buildings. Police sometimes fire on looters. Other times, they join them. Generals load planes with cash, gold, and valuables. On the night of April 22nd, explosions rock the city as fuel and ammunition dumps go up in flames. The next day, communist troops enter, singing revolutionary songs. Chen Yi and Deng Xiaoping take turns sitting in Chiang's chair at the presidential palace. From Nanjing, the PLA moves to Wuhan, then Shanghai. The nationalists assign Deng Enbo to defend China's financial capital. He declares it the Stalingrad of China and unleashes brutal order squads to execute looters, communist suspects, and black marketeers. Their bodies are paraded through the streets. Forced laborers dig trenches and build machine gun nests, but Deng's fanaticism is detached from reality. Many of his troops either defect or throw down their weapons. Mao makes no effort to stop Deng and 50,000 of his 200,000 men from escaping by sea. After a weary wait of several weeks, Shanghai fell to the communists on the 25th of May. Barely a shot was fired as the business community and the triads had quietly switched sides. The nationalists were seen in full retreat, some of the troops marching almost in parade formation, others streaking through the city in terror and confusion, caked with mud from the battlefield. Shanghai heaved a sigh of relief. There was no looting, raping, or requisitioning. Shanghai's fall highlights the gulf between Chiang's urban supporters and Mao's rural ones. Over the following days, locals swapped stories about the country bumpkins now occupying their city. One widely told anecdote features PLA troops who, never having seen a modern toilet, try to wash their rice in the bowl. When one of them accidentally pulls the flush, they watch in horror as their dinner disappears into the plumbing. Other tales speak of mules tied up in hotel lobbies, soldiers captivated by elevators, or trying to light cigarettes from electric light bulbs. Now, these are not all condescending urban myths either. Some will later be confirmed as true by PLA veterans themselves. With Beijing, Shanghai, and Nanjing fallen, Mao now stands at the head of the world's most populous nation. On October 1st, 1949, Mao proclaims the creation of a new state, the People's Republic of China, from atop the Tiananmen Gate in the center of Beijing. The new red flag with its 5 golden stars is revealed to the public. The new anthem, March of the Volunteers, booms across the square. There is a 21-gun salute. After the pageantry, Mao reads his address. Fellow countrymen, the Central People's Government of the People's Republic of China was established today. The people throughout China have been plunged into bitter suffering and tribulations since the Chiang Kai-shek Kuomintang reactionary government betrayed the fatherland, colluded with imperialists, and launched the counter-revolutionary war. Now, the People's War of Liberation has been basically won, and the majority of the people in the country have been liberated. Mao is not wrong that the war is essentially over, although there are still a few more battles on the mainland. The communists take Changsha and Chiang in August. Guangzhou falls in October as the nationalists retreat further south. By this point, an average of 50 nationalist planes a day are transferring men, weapons, and wealth to Taiwan. The KMT briefly declares Chongqing its capital again, just as it had during the war with Japan. Chiang arrives to rally the defense, but flees to Chengdu and then boards a plane to Taiwan before the battle ends. He never returns to the Chinese mainland. All that's left for Mao is a series of mopping up operations, for there are still quite large nationalist remnants, along with some generals and Chiang allied warlords left on the mainland. Together with organized criminals and pirates, the nationalists used these forces to fight something of a guerrilla war on land and at sea for the next couple years. I won't go into detail on that. You can watch a special episode we made for the Korea channel to get more information. But to cut a long story short, the PLA launches a series of campaigns to suppress banditry, which eventually eliminate any remaining opposition. In early 1950, the PLA eliminates Muslim warlord and Chiang ally Ma Bufang in Xinjiang, takes Hainan Island in the spring, and annexes Tibet in October. Aside from Taiwan and Hong Kong, this means that Mao has unified China and restored the Qing Empire's borders. For now, at least, Chiang is safe on Taiwan. The communists lack the naval power to invade. But long-term, his survival depends on America. Will the U.S. keep funding him? Will Taiwan fall under the U.S. defense umbrella in East Asia? In 1949, the answer seems to be no. U.S. Secretary of State Dean Acheson prepares for Taiwan's fall, and in January 1950, Truman announces an end to all U.S. aid. But in the months after that, things will change rapidly, and Truman will decide to take a harder stance against the Soviet Union and the People's Republic of China. The beginning of the Korean War will give Chiang a second lease on life. Still, the loss of China contributes to the fracturing of American domestic politics. Republicans accuse the administration of abandoning Chiang and handing victory to Mao, Stalin, and global communism. They point to supposed communist sympathies within the liberal establishment. Meanwhile, Chiang's critics claim vindication. This clash will haunt U.S. political life for the next decade. So, why did Mao win the Civil War? Or more accurately, perhaps, why did Chiang lose? After all, he seemed to hold most of the cards back in 1945. We have covered many of the reasons across this series. The communists avoided battle for much of World War II and were left relatively alone to build up their forces. They also avoided blame for the devastation of the war and emerged with a reputation for discipline and unity. Mao consolidated control over the CCP with little internal opposition, while the nationalists remained divided and factional. On the battlefield, communist commanders adapted quickly, blending guerrilla warfare with large-scale operations. Their troops were more mobile, well-motivated, and often better led. In contrast, Chiang's forces relied on rigid, conventional tactics and repeatedly fell back into cities where they were encircled and destroyed. Despite superior weapons and numbers, poor morale, corruption, logistical chaos plagued the KMT. Hyperinflation wrecked the economy and turned even Chiang's middle-class supporters against him eventually. Chiang's supporters at home and in the States will point, with some justification, to Truman's lukewarm backing of him. But that doesn't change the fact that Chiang's regime alienated potential allies, refused meaningful reform, and never inspired the same commitment from its soldiers or civilians. Perhaps most importantly, Chiang lost the peasantry, the people who make up almost 90% of China's population. I think there's one quote that sums things up pretty well. It's from Michael Lynch, who I've quoted regularly throughout this series. He points out how far Chiang's nationalist government had slipped from the original ideas of its founder Sun Yat-sen, who had wanted to create a party for the people. Far from being a party of the people, the KMT under Chiang became a party of China's small social and financial elite. It drew its support from the bankers and merchants of urban China, who tended either to despise or to ignore the impoverished peasants of the countryside. Such failings seemed all the more culpable in nationalist China, since they contradicted the principles on which the KMT government was avowedly based. In 1943, Chiang had written a celebrated book, China's Destiny, in which he called upon the Chinese people to suppress all selfish thoughts and join with his party in a great national movement of moral regeneration. Such an appeal rang increasingly hollow as China slipped further into decline and the interests of the ordinary Chinese citizens were disregarded. In the end, it was those same impoverished and despised peasants, the same ones who tried to wash their rice in the toilet bowls of Shanghai hotels, who decided China's fate. They may not have loved Mao, but by the end, they hated Chiang. as did millions upon millions of Chinese people. Now Mao will remake the Chinese state in his image. He will sign a treaty of alliance with the Soviet Union, enact land reform, suppress opposition, and intervene in the Korean War. One thing I can tell you for sure is that although the Chinese Civil War is over, the bloodshed and the suffering is far from finished. It is thanks to the TimeGhost Army that we can produce this series and everything else we do on this channel, the World War II channel, and on the Korean War channel. You too can join the army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. Steve Verdoliva, cool name, is the TimeGhost Army Member of the Week, and these are the newest commissioned officers. If you want to watch the special where we examine the PLA forces that will fight in the Korean War, you can click here for that. It came out just a few months ago. Do not forget to subscribe. See you next time.